Very good. I see now the numbers are reaching a good number, so we will be starting. Welcome everyone to this webinar on the future of the EU ETS to 2040. My name is Jerome Kisilevich. I'm a team leader here at Climact, and I'll be acting as your moderator today during the webinar. Before we start, I just want to mention that this webinar is being recorded, so if you're not happy about it, it's now time to leave, but otherwise, we, of course, happy to have you on board, and the recordings will be shared after the webinar, and that's together with the slides. A few housekeeping rules, as you can see on the slide, is that we will be sharing the slides and recording at the end of the webinar, and we invite you to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll have a bit of time at the end of the webinar to go through them. Before I go any further, I just want to introduce the other panelists on the webinar. So if you want one slide before. So I'm very happy to be joined today by my two Climact colleagues here in the same room as me, actually, Simon Lalieu and Corentin Bont, who are two ETS experts behind the tool that we will be presenting during the webinar today. I'm also very happy to be joined by Lydia Temelini from Carbon Market Watch. Carbon Market Watch has been a key partner and has played a key supporting role for the development of this tool and the scenarios that have been designed with the tool so far and that we'll be exploring today. It's also important to mention that the tool has been developed with the support of the River tool, which is an add-on to Excel and that we have used as technical solution behind the model. And finally, very important to mention that the European Climate Foundation has been the key actor behind the financing of the development of the tool. And so it's important to recognize that and thanks them for their input. I already went to the housekeeping rules. So before we go into the really details and meat of the webinar, I suggest just a brief introduction to Climact for the ones who don't know it yet. So Climact, we are a consultancy with a clear mission, which is to empower organizations to act on energy, climate, and nature in an integrated way. And so to do so, we combine a range of services that we provide both to support long-term vision and long-term transition strategies and scenarios with their concrete implementation on a day-to-day basis. We support organizations of all sizes, from city level to regional, national, EU, and beyond, working both with public and private sectors. And as we'll see today, we provide tailor-made consulting to more advanced software development. And if you get to the next slide, just want to mention that different type of services that we bring to support action in organization. We support from strategic consulting to data analytics and softwares and tools. And so why are we here today? Well, you all know the context of the von der Leyen II Commission with a very strong focus on Clean Industrial Deal, on EU competitiveness and reindustrialization. And in that context, the next big milestone is the revision of the EU ETS for the period post-2030 to 2040. And it's in that context that we've been commissioned by the European Climate Foundation to develop a tool that basically allows to cut through the noise and provide fact-based input to the discussion that are coming in view of this revision. And this is what we will be presenting today, the ETS.climate tool to simulate the future of the ETS under different scenarios. And to do so, as I said, I'm very happy to have my very talented ETS expert colleagues here, Simon and Corentin, and we'll talk through a number of points on the agenda. We'll start by providing a perspective of the context and why this tool is an important feature in the current discussion. And we'll also talk through the key building blocks of the tool. Corentin will then walk us through a demonstration of the tool and its online interface. We then go back to Simon, who will talk through the three contrasted scenarios that have so far been designed with the tool with the support of Carbon Market Watch. The word will then go to Lydia to provide the perspective of the users and how they've made use of the tool. And we'll finally close with some take-home messages and some time for Q&A. So with this, the floor is yours, Simon, for the introduction.
Thank you, Jerome. So a bit of introduction. As you know, the European Climate Law was revised in March 26 to include a 2040 target of 90% reduction on the net emission compared to 1990. So this is on top of the existing 55% reduction target by 2030, and it set the path towards climate neutrality by 2050. The 2040 target comes with a flexibility of up to 5% through international carbon credits, meaning that the domestic reduction target should be at least minus 85%. And ETS emission in that context, ETS will be short for ETS1 in this webinar. ETS emission cover about a third of European emission actually, and include mainly electricity, heat generation, energy-intensive industries, and a part of aviation and maritime. The 2030 reduction target of 55% was translated into a specific ETS target of minus 61% relative to 2005 year. But so far, the 2040 reduction target of 85–90% hasn't yet been broken down into an ETS-specific target. For this, a Commission proposal is expected by mid-July 26, mid-July of this year. And the goal of this webinar is to assess the impact of different policy options on ETS emission reduction to 2040, and by extension on the overall 2040 target of 85–90%. Because reaching the 2040 targets directly depends on ETS ambition. Whatever isn't reduced through the ETS will have to be reduced elsewhere, and particularly in ESR sectors. So I mean buildings and transport. So we have four possible cases. If both the ETS and ESR are ambitious, for instance, 90% reduction for ETS and 70% for ESR, this is a green case. The overall 90% target is reached without international credits. On the opposite, if both targets are unambitious, it is the red case and the target is missed, even with the flexibility mechanism. If only ETS or ESR is ambitious, then the target of 85% is achievable, but international credits will be needed. For instance, an unambitious minus 70% ETS target would require an 85% reduction from ESR, which is an extremely demanding target for the ESR sectors. So the point is, a clear and an ambitious ETS target for 2040 is essential to comply with the European climate law. In that context, the tool developed by Climact simulates the ETS system by 2040 under different policy options. It answers key questions displayed here. For instance, what's the impact of a given linear reduction factor or the market stability reserve on allowance supply? What's the effect of the cross-sectoral correction factor on free allowances, of the extending of aviation scope, removals, international credits, and so on? So the tool goes beyond stakeholders' position in the public debate to quantitatively, robustly, and transparently assess the impact of those positions by 2040. To do that, the ETS Climact tool asks users to define policy parameters, the scope, cap, the splits between auction, found free allowances, but also the MSR, market stability reserve parameters. So these policy parameters simulate the supply. The demand isn't directly simulated by the tool, but instead users choose several emission scenarios that are differentiated by sector. And based on these inputs, so both the policy parameters and the emission scenarios, the model then simulates the functioning of the EU ETS and delivers output at different levels. The main outputs at the macro level are obviously the annual evolution of the TNAC for total number of allowances in circulation, the supply and demand broken down by sources, so auction, free allowances, funds, MSR, but also a macro output is the detailed annual functioning of the MSR. And at a more granular level, the model also provides auction projection by member states, free allowances by sector and by benchmark. And so the auction and the free allowances are key indicators for estimating public revenues on one hand and planning decarbonization investment on the other hand. So now we are.
Thank you for the introduction, then, Simon. We'll now move to Corentin, who will provide an introduction to the tool itself. And so we'll switch the screen so that we can go into the actual tool in just a moment. And for the question that might be raised on that, at the end of the webinar, we'll share a web link that will allow you to log into the tool and explore the pre-existing scenarios that will be displayed and discussed later in the discussion by the team here.
Thank you.
Over to you, Corentin.
Thank you, Jerome. So I will walk you through the web tool itself, the ETS.Climact simulator, and demonstrate how you can use it to explore different policy scenarios for the future of the EU ETS. The layout is very user-friendly. When you enter the tool after logging in, you will see different outputs on the right and inputs on the left. And the graphs on the right react to the inputs that are selected on the left side. I will start by showing you what the tool can tell you, the outputs, and then we'll review the inputs that Simon already introduced. So on the output side of the tool, you can navigate through different results for each scenario by navigating through the tabs above the graphs. The first result you'll see is the cap and emissions trajectory. This shows the overall cap over time plotted alongside the annual supply of EU allowances and the projected verified emissions, which represent the demand side. The graph also shows a key indicator for the surplus in the carbon market, the total number of allowances in circulation, or the TNAC indicator. So this graph really gives you at a glance an overall view of the ETS system up until 2040. The second graph you can explore is the annual supply of allowances. As you can see, we have the overall cap and the yearly supply, but this time the supply is divided into different categories. The main ones are the number of allowances auctioned each year by member states and the number of free allocations. But we also have info on, for example, the size of different funds, such as the Innovation Fund or the Modernization Fund. The third key result focuses on the demand of allowances over time. Here we distinguish 4 sectors. There is demand for stationary installations, meaning industry and power generation. And then there is the demand coming from aviation and the maritime sector. The next tab focuses on the evolution of the number of allowances in the Market Stability Reserve at the end of each year. As a reminder, the Market Stability Reserve, or MSR, is a mechanism that is used to better balance supply and demand in the EU ETS. It's used to withdraw from or add allowances to the auctioning volumes in function of the surplus indicator of the market. The last 2 graphs show more granularity for auctioning volumes and free allocation volumes in phase 5 of the EU ETS. For auctioning, there is a division by member state, and for free allocation, a division by sector. This is to show that the model outputs are really granular and we can show supply and demand at sector and country level. Lastly, for each type of output, the tool provides a summary of the key insights in the form of key indicators at the bottom of the page, such as we have the overall supply of allowances in phase 5 or the relative decrease of supply in 2040 compared to 2005 ETS emissions. So those were all the outputs available for each scenario designed in the tool. And as already explained by Simon, each scenario is determined by a combination of levers or assumptions. And as you can see on the screen, for each lever, there is a range of options available. These options reflect different technical or policy decisions behind the mechanics of the EU ETS. And these are the parameters that will be discussed during the upcoming revision. So each new combination of levers results in a new scenario, and that is really the key feature of the ETS.Climact tool. Now, you don't have to choose all of these inputs from scratch. At the top, you will notice you can select pre-configured scenarios. These are combinations of levers representing different policy options from status quo to ambitious, climate ambitious. Simon will talk you through each of these scenarios in a minute. When logging into the tool, you will have access to these three predefined scenarios and the assumptions behind them in full transparency. And if you want to go further and start exploring alternative scenarios, we invite you to engage with the Climact team that will support you in that journey. This is key to ensure the consistency and coherence behind each scenario, because the tool allows you to fine-tune scenarios or test specific what-if questions by adjusting the individual levers. These are grouped thematically. For example, in the cap group, you will find assumptions that determine the evolution of the cap. The levers here determine the linear reduction factor, or the rate at which the overall ETS cap decreases annually. The model makes a distinction between three subcaps, being the stationary, maritime, and aviation subcap. Each of them can be adjusted individually. For example, let's say we want to decrease the reduction rate of the stationary subcap to 2%. You will see that the scenario is adjusted and the outputs change. Here in the supply graph, we see that the cap is decreasing at a much more slower rate as expected, and with also the supply of allowances increasing. So by adjusting individual levers, the tool allows you to test what the impact is on the overall system and to see how they interact with other input options. So that was, in short, the ETS.Climact simulator, a tool where you can explore different scenarios for the future of the ETS. And with that, I give back the floor to Jérôme.
Excellent. Thank you, Corentin, for that. And as I said, we will be sharing at the end of the webinar the link to access the simulator. And from there, you'll be able to explore the three predefined scenarios. And as we are switching screen again, I will just mention what Simon will now talk through is basically these three predefined scenarios and some of the key findings associated with them. And Lydia will then provide their own perspective on it. So over to you, Simon.
Yes, thank you, Jérôme. So let's take a look at some key insights into the possible future of the ETS1 by 2040. A quick disclaimer, Climact doesn't have access to the Commission proposal yet, so we've come up with a few interesting scenarios. As Corentin introduced, we've predefined three contrasted scenarios. The first one, the status quo scenario, represented in this slide by a straight road, extends the current ETS parameters to 2040. For instance, the benchmark thresholds are between minus 0.3 and minus 2.5%. The climate ambitious scenario, represented by the Earth, compiles the most climatically ambitious position across all parameters. So, for instance, the phasing out of free allowances is in non-CBAM sectors follows the same schedule as CBAM sectors. And all the positions of this scenario have been expressed by various stakeholders. We do not invent new things. We collect a position in the public debate. And finally, we have the empty shell scenario, which is the opposite. I mean, it is compiling the least ambitious position from a climate perspective. For instance, it assumes a market stability reserve low threshold at 700 million allowances instead of the current 400 million. These scenarios are not entirely mutually exclusive. This is why we are using Venn diagrams, because we will see, and we will see it when going through the parameter just right now. The first parameter users can adjust is the emissions scenario, so the demand of the system. Here specifically for stationary emissions. The empty shell scenario in orange follows a WAM trajectory from the EEA. The other two scenarios follow a linear net zero 2040 trajectory, which is a bit fictional, that's right, but it is necessary to get coherent results on TNEC evolution, as we will see. Then another key parameter in the public debate right now is the linear reduction factor. The climate ambitious and status quo scenarios both carry forward the 2030 value of 4.4 beyond 2031. On the opposite, the empty shell scenario in orange uses a 2% linear reduction factor from 2031, and yes, this 2% scenario corresponds to a cap reaching zero in 2050. A quick reminder for the next parameters. You know that the CBAM phase-in has an equivalent in the ETS system. It's a phase-out of free allowances. And this phase-out of free allowances currently applies in the ETS to CBAM sectors only. Here, the climate ambitious scenario extends this phase-out to non-CBAM sector as well, to increase the share of emissions covered by a carbon price signal. On the opposite, the empty shell scenario delays the phase-out of CBAM sector, pushing it back to 2038 instead of 2034 in the status quo scenario. Then we have the aviation scope, which is crucial as well. Currently, the ETS covers aviation emission from intra-EEA flights only. And the climate ambitious scenario extends that scope to all flights departing from the EEA and then, of course, increases the aviation cap for the supply part. Finally, we have two flexibility mechanisms that you may have heard of. The CDR for carbon dioxide removals, and we have the international carbon credits. Both flexibility mechanisms are only activated in the empty shell scenario with a cap on international credits in 2040 equivalent to 5% of 1990 EU net emission, and CDR capped to a maximum of 20 megatons of CO2 equivalent in 2040. So in total, the model has close to 30 levers. Here, we only cover the main ones, but all the details are available transparently on the online tool, as explained by Corentin. Let's move on to some key insights now. Here is the total supply between from 2031 to 2040 for the three predefined scenarios. A few things to highlight first. The climate ambitious scenario has a higher total supply than the status quo, so the two first columns. And this is mainly because the extended aviation scope of the climate ambitious scenario increases the auction proportionally. So we see that free allowances, the second bar in, let's say, middle blue, the second bar in both columns, are about 1,000 million lower in the climate ambitious scenario. And this is due to the fact that the non-CBAM sector are phased out, which increase the innovation fund in green, not not by the full 1,000 million, but because the cap limits the growth of the innovation fund. Let's look at the empty shell supply, so the third column, the last one. The total supply from 31 to 40 is almost twice that of the status quo. And this is mainly due to the 2% linear reduction factor, but also to the flexibilities, so the CDR and international credits, respectively in dark pink and mauve in the third column. These two flexibility add around 9% to the supply. So this is very significant in this scenario. Okay, specifically for the status quo supply, now let's look at the trajectory. It is well known the trends toward zero. I mean, the supply reached zero by 2039 or 2040, and paired with an ambitious demand scenarios displayed here by the green line, the TNAC in dashed red will gradually decrease from 2032 and will sharply drop from 2038. What we called an ambitious demand scenario, we mean a net zero emission by 2040 for stationary emission, a WAM scenario for maritime, and a slightly declining emission for aviation. What we see also is that the market stability reserve, shown in the hatched area, stops withdrawing allowances from 2027, and this is because the simulated demand tracks the supply closely, as explained. And so the TNAC stabilizes around the 800 million. Now, if we look at the supply breakdown by source for the status quo scenario, we see a gradual decline of free allowances in medium blue. And this gradual decline is in line with the cap, and it is mirrored by the rise of the innovation fund in light red. So if we keep the current rules of the ETS, this is how the different pots will evolve. So a big increase of the innovation fund in the next decade. And in this scenario, we also see that the supply stays above the cap from 2030 to 2039. This is mainly due to a carryover of allowances and specifically of free allowances, because in this scenario, the supply fell short of demand in previous years, and then there is a rollover into the years after. And so this is why we have this carryover of free allowances and this supply above the cap, which is totally understandable. Let's now have a look at the empty shell scenario and discover why we called it empty shell. It looks very different, actually. Huh? We have this 2 linear reduction factor combined with CDR and carbon credit flexibilities. And all this inflates the supply significantly. That's exactly what we called it empty shell. If we combine all the least ambitious parameters in the public debate right now, it will prevent any meaningful reduction in ETS emission by 2040. This is clear. And it could actually even lead to an increase when we account for the surplus of the system. So in this scenario, the ETS is kept in place, but untied of its purpose, making the overall 85 to 90% reduction target unachievable. And this is precisely why a tool like the ETS Climact tool is essential to assess the real impact, the quantitative impact of policy position. Then the climate ambitious scenario so the opposite of the empty shell scenario, poses the opposite challenge. Finding the right balance between decarbonation and industrial competitiveness. If we combine the most ambitious parameters, it leads to a technically feasible ETS trajectory, that's for sure, but that also drives to the TNAC close to zero by 2040. So this scenario would therefore need to be paired with a complementary mechanism by the end of the next decade to account for hard-to-abate emission, but also fossil aviation beyond 2040. This is not the end of the story in this scenario. So now let's show that the ETS Climact tool also provides free allowances projection by sector and also by benchmark in the expert version of the model. So here in green, the climate ambitious scenarios show significantly lower free allowances, especially for non-CBAM sector than the status quo scenario in blue, because as we explained, the CBAM is phased out. The CBAM phase out applies to non-CBAM in the climate ambitious scenario. And for the empty shell scenario in orange, what we see is much more free allowances overall because the supply is much higher. And also we have a delayed CBAM phase out pushed back to 2038. Finally, the ETS Climact tool also projects auction by member states out to 2040. The auction for member states are clearly a critical input for public revenues scenario. Here what we see is that both climate ambitious and empty shell scenarios project higher national auctions than the status quo, but for different reasons. The climate ambition is driven by the extent of the aviation scope, and so the increase of the auction. And for the empty shell scenario, it's mainly the lower linear reduction factor. So these examples illustrate the robustness and the transparency of the ETS Climact tool. This is a tool that goes well beyond the predefined scenarios and allows users to explore a wide range of policy option combination.
Thank you, Simon, for this detailed and dense presentation on the key insights. And to answer one of the questions that was already asked in the Q&A, the slides will be shared, so you'll have a chance to go into a bit more details on these and also explore these results through the tool itself. We'll now switch to you, Lydia, and ask you to provide some user perspective on how you've been using the tool yourself to inform your own positioning. Over to you, Lydia.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jerome. Thanks a lot also to Simon and Corentin and to the rest of the Climact team. I'll just start explaining why this collaboration has been so essential for us and for our work at Carbon Market Watch. We work obviously on carbon markets, and I specifically work on the ETS and on the CBAM, on how to decarbonize European industry. And previous collaboration with Climact, as they provided a model for the ETS for phase 4, 2021 to 2030, was indeed essential for us to produce our positioning and some pieces of output. I listed just a couple here. Our report in collaboration with WWF, A Clean Industrial Revolution in Europe, where thanks to the model, we were able to show forecasted free allowances by sectors. Here we can see chemicals and fertilizers, for example. And another great example is our revenue simulator that we're able to model, again, up to 2030 member states revenues for each member state and for the whole of the EU, again, up to the end of this trading phase. So we were very keen on having a model that showed us what will happen to the supply after 2030, especially right now, as we are really quickly approaching the new proposal. And in the next slides, I listed very quickly all the elements that are up for reform. As you can see, I don't want to call it an overhaul, but it may very well become an overhaul of the ETS if all of the levers are touched. There are some changes in the architecture that were expected, that were actually mandated by the directive itself. We knew that carbon removals are an element that had to be investigated by the Commission through a report and potentially a proposal. But then other elements, such as the change of the linear reduction factor, were not necessarily mandated, but are to be expected at this stage. And many other changes, of course, non-CBAM sectors are a great concern, as well as potential scope extensions from waste incineration to, well, we will hope to aviation, or to a broader scope for aviation emissions. So knowing this, in the next slide, I tried to sort of list what we knew was wanted to keep from the previous revision, from the text that was agreed upon in 2023. It was a relatively successful revision that led to an ETS that, albeit not perfect, and of course we still had quite a few elements that we were not happy with, was definitely a step forward to the previous situation. It included this linear reduction factor, eventually reaching 4.4, that will definitely be compatible with climate goals, and we know is already compatible with the new climate law, with minus 90% by 2040. It finally was foreseeing a phase out for free allocation for certain highly polluting industrial sector. It included the 100% earmarking of ETS revenues for climate policies, a full free allocation phase out for aviation, scope extension to shipping, and other elements that we welcomed. However, as I said, still some tweaks were needed in our view for this to become an even more climate ambition instrument. Again, ultimately the EU ETS is, of course, a market-based tool, but it is a climate policy. The end goal is to make efficient reduction effective and efficient as well, but indeed it needs to make emission reduction happen ultimately. So we're having already some ideas on how this this revision could improve this framework, this essential framework, and we have some ideas, right? So we know that we are structurally, the ETS has been structurally oversupplied for years, and we're currently still in a condition of oversupply. So it is important that sort of ends in a relatively short time frame for the system to start putting pressure on some sectors. We wanted free allocation to be phased out for the polluter pays principle to be fully applied. We want to make sure that we ensure transparency and additionality in member state spending, and for us that also means need to understand what amounts of revenues will be available given the supply. Of course, we would like to see scope extensions. The climate ambitious scenarios, it was already mentioned, foresees an extension to international flights, to private jets, as well as small vessels and waste incineration. And of course, there are other elements that are not necessarily reflected in a supply-based model, such as conditionalities for residual free allocation and whatnot. So these ideas, sort of this scenarios that we had in mind, needed to be checked against what they actually means for the supply. Most of the elements that I mentioned are really supply based and are levers for the change the overall outlook of the ETS. Other elements are more related maybe to the polluter pays principle and or to the price, which is something that then can be reflected in other models, and is obviously much harder to predict, and is also something that to some extent we want to see how it evolves. Also, we want to see if in some cases the demand for allowances is less that we can actually predict now. We always hope that decarbonization picks up the pace and the demand scenarios are not ambitious enough, let's put it this way. So thanks to Climact, we were able to, again, contrast some of these ideas and see what they meant in reality. So in the next, I brought two examples here, the CAP, so the linear reduction factor and the free allocation. So in the next slides, we can see what we found, you know, some ideas for the CAP meant, for the linear reduction factor meant. You can see here that just a small, well, not a small tweak, but decreasing the cap to 3.4% leads to 1 gigatons of emissions, additional emissions, so 1 billion metric tons of additional emissions into the system. Not to talk about a decrease to 2.4, which some stakeholders have been called for, that leads to 3 additional billions of metric tons of emissions into the system. And again, the ETS is an emission reduction system. So this is our primary concern, the cap, and then we can discuss of everything that happens under the cap. So we know that, as I mentioned, the LRF is most likely up for to be rediscussed. And we also know that we wanted tweaks to happen in a way that is, as much as possible, carbon budget neutral, because we can't afford many more emissions to enter the atmosphere. So thanks to, you know, contrasting our view with a supply-based model, we developed a new position, which is our proposal now for a 2-tiered linear reduction factor that is slightly stricter in the very short term. Again, we see a system that is still structurally oversupplied, and that crisis after crisis remained oversupplied. We've seen this happen with the COVID crisis, the energy, like gas price spikes, and now the decrease production by some actors, and we are likely to see it again. Now we will enter most likely a phase of structural scarcity of fossil fuels. So we see that crisis after crisis, the ETS continues remaining oversupplied, and on top of that, there are still low-hanging fruits that can be addressed. Electrification, more than anything. We know that still, for stationary emissions under the EU ETS, still come for the majority, 82% for them, still come from fossil fuel combustion. This is something that we know need to get rid of. So in the short term, there are really huge spaces for improvement and for decrease of emissions. However, indeed, residual emissions are a concern and something that we hear, that we are aware of. And again, to remain carbon budget neutral and with a slightly stricter LRF in the short term, it will be possible to have sort of a loosening after mid-2030s towards the end of the 2030s, appreciating for really hard to abate residual emissions, so leading to let's say the end game of the EU ETS after the current end date, which is after 2039. So this was a huge, like a pretty big change for our positioning, but that again was possible to realize, to draft, also thanks to contrasting it with the model. Another example, again, something that is really close to our hearts, let's say, free allocation. This is a very interesting, but well, thanks to the model, you can change a lot of parameters and see what changes and in terms especially of revenues for member states and for the EU when you change just a few parameters related to free allocation. I'm thinking the benchmarks, I'm thinking obviously the CBAM factors or the phase-out factors, whatever we want to call it. And we already had some pretty worrying data from this current trading phase. So this graph, this infographic comes from the Clean Industrial Revolution report and reflects all of phase 4. So you can see that the volumes for the value of free allocation handed out and to be handed out are much bigger than the tools we put in place and that were put in place to support decarbonization, such as the Innovation Fund. And again, in that same report, we saw that just as 2 years delay of the CBAM would have led to almost halving the allowances that were supposed to feed into the Innovation Fund. Luckily, that didn't happen, but we still know that it's possible that we will see some changes in the phase out of the free allocation for CBAM sectors, and we're not sure yet of what it will be of non-CBAM sectors. So we were happy to see that the model was able to reflect a bit more of an ambitious scenario, again, calling for the end of all free allocations by 2034. You will see in the model that even if we pick this very ambitious scenario, we will still be handing out from now to, well, to the end of all free allocation, as the ambitious the ambitious scenario foresees still 2.3 billion of allowances, and that's huge. And in terms of value, of course, it still depends on the price, and the price is never certain, but we can expect at least 190 billion euros of value to be forgone for revenues. And again, this is, I highlighted, a scenario that we see as ambitious now, but we know that free allocation is a very distortive system that does not reflect one of the key principles that we want to follow in EU legislation, which is the polluter pays principle, and that the more free allowances we hand out, the less revenues we have for innovative actors, for member states' budget, and for climate policies at large. So we expect a reform for free allocation. We expect it to be more targeted, more tied to decarbonization investment, and we hope that it's going to be the case. However, we need to keep in mind the free allocation in itself, has been a distortive system that does not necessarily benefit innovative actors as much as it benefits incumbent actors at the moment. These are the two examples that I wanted to bring, and there's much more in our new position paper that we will present on Monday in another webinar, also at 11 a.m. I'll put the link in the chat, and there we will be able to go, well, much deeper into all of our new positioning. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for these insights and practical examples of how you've been using the tool in your own work. And we look forward to the more extensive version of the position on Monday. We now have a bit of time for Q&A. So I see there is already a first question in the chat that will voice here, and I invite you all to raise your questions in the chats, and then we'll make our best to address most of them. The first question to you, Simon, is around the following. Does the tool only calculate supply-demand balances, or can it also estimate a price equilibrium in a different scenario?
Yeah, indeed, that's a fair question, because we know that the price is key for many stakeholders. The answer in short is yes, we are currently working on that feature in the tool. We know that there are many prices projections available right now. Our approach will be to offer a robust price model based on the balance between the supply and the demand to determine annual price trends by 2040. And yes, indeed, as I said, it is an essential feather for making investment plans for private sector, but also budget projection for the public sector, which we plan to offer.
Indeed, so yeah, to make it very clear, the current tool doesn't provide that, but it's indeed something that Climact can provide on top of the tool, or need to integrate in the future, depending on how it evolves. We have another question, which is quite specific from when at a Carbon Market Watch, around the number of how many different levers or variables can actually be tweaked on the web version of the model. I think you mentioned close to 30.
Close to 30, indeed. And we can show it if I have. Yes, close to 30. Right.
And the way that the model works is that basically for each of these, you have a range of options that are in the version of the tool that's public, predefined for each of the three scenarios, and you can see at what level they've been predefined for each of these scenarios. And then if you want to go further, as mentioned by Quentin, and we invite you to contact us so that we can work with you on that, as it does require some careful manipulation to ensure you end up with a scenario that is actually robust and coherent and makes sense, and not just something that goes into completely incoherent ways. Any other questions from participants? how to access the tool. Good question. So we will be sharing the link just in a few minutes here in the chat, and we'll be sending it to all by email as well after the webinar. You click on the link, then you'll land on a page where you just need to log in to be able to access. And then once you're set, this is a version of the tool where you have the 3 predefined scenarios accessible that you can explore and see how they've been defined. And then if you want to go further, you can just click on a button in the tool itself that will put you in touch with the team here so that we can explore how to best support you. We have another question from Gianluca, which is the following. We heard some proposal to include scope 2 in the ETS3 allowance calculation. Can this tool be used to assess the impact of such measure?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I don't know. The answer is no, and it's not entirely clear how the inclusion of scope 2 would happen. But once it's the rules are made more clear and public, this is probably something we could include in a further version of the tool. Really, the message here is that we want to start. We want to have this tool right now because there is a crucial discussion in the public debate. Clearly, the tool will continue to evolve. For instance, in July, we will include the Commission proposal in it to show the impact of the tool. If the scope 2 is part of the proposal, we will indeed make it evolve to capture this policy option.
Indeed, the objective is probably to as the discussion progress, to be able to do more predefined scenarios basically directly in the tool so that we can explore how they impact. And related to that, there's a question from Sam here, which is the following. Does the model allow to take into account the Commission proposal ceasing the invalidation of MSR allowances?
Yes, so that's a good question indeed, because the MSR rules have been, the Commission suggested to update the MSR rule, firework, a few weeks ago. This is not voted yet, but still we implemented this policy option in the empty shell scenario. So this is a policy option available in the tool. Yes. It is not. It was not the policy option we took for the status quo scenario, because it's not voted yet. So, but once it will be voted, we'll clearly integrate this new rule for all scenarios.
Very good. I think we've addressed all the questions for now. So last call for last round of question. If there are none or non-immediates, we can invite you, of course, to not hesitate to contact us directly if you have follow-up questions or if you want to investigate some particular aspects more in detail. We'll be happy to get back to you separately as well. So do so. But if there are no further questions in the chat, I guess we're nearing noon, at least here in Brussels. So people are getting hungry. So we can go to.
There's actually one
more question.
Yeah. So, is it possible to focus on a specific industry? The answer is yes. For free allowances, we, as I say, we provide projection of free allowances per sector, but also per benchmark. It's not shown in the web tool, the benchmark evolution, but it's available in the expert version of the tool, so we can provide precisely the evolution of free allowances for a specific benchmark yearly by 2040 for different scenarios, obviously.
Thank you. And one more question came in, which is around the demand side, and whether basically the bottom line question is what assumptions are used to define and compute the demand side, and whether we take abatement cost into account.
Mm-hmm. So the demand is not modeled in itself in the tool. We we use predefined scenarios of demand, and there are multiple scenarios of demand, and the user can choose the most relevant one. So we do not use abatement cost right now. In the coming feeder of adding a cost price evolution, this will be included in the simulation.
Thank you. And then another question just popped in, which is around the role of activity rates for individual sectors and which do they play in the tool?
The benchmark. Yeah. So by activity rates, in the calculation of the free allowances, we use the benchmark evolution parameters. We'll update the benchmark value for the period 2026 to 2030 once they will be published by the Commission. It should be very soon. And then this benchmark continue to evolve by 2040 with specific the specific parameter chosen by the user. The activity level of each benchmark, we have different activity projections. For now, what we've shown are a flat activity evolution by 2040 for each benchmark, each sector. It's a simplification assumption, but we can choose others. For instance, in a more circularity scenario, we can assume a decrease of the production for some sector, some benchmark by 2040. And these are predefined scenarios of the activity that the user can choose, and that will change the evolution of free allowances, obviously.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. And I will click send now, and you have access to the link to the tool in the chat right now. So we have 2 more minutes. I'll just close this webinar by some key take-home messages on the next slides, which are really echoing the key messages that Simon already laid out in this discussion of the 3 predefined scenarios. The first one is that basically achieving a minus 90% emission reduction target by 2040 require ambitious targets for both ETS and ESR sectors. So that is clear. We see with the tool that keeping the current ETS rules is actually close to the most climate ambitious scenario. So we are on a good track basically with the current rules. That being said, we see that reducing supply without taking into account the hard to abate residual emission into account, it creates clear challenges, notably in terms of competitiveness, and these must be carefully addressed. And finally, the bottom line of the whole exercise is that if we really roll back ambition on all parameters of the ETS simultaneously, we simply cannot achieve the objective of the European Climate Law, which is obviously a major drawback on that if that happens. So with this, we invite you to connect to the tool, to explore it yourself, and to explore these pre-existing scenarios. And for now, let me thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found it very insightful. As I said already several times, we'll be sharing the recording and the slides. Let me thank you, Lydia, for your participation in this webinar, but also for the very collaborative collaboration. Yeah, that's a bit of a pleonasm, but for the very good collaboration we had in this project. And we're very pleased that you've been able to use the tool directly in your own positioning that will be released on Monday. So a reminder to all join that webinar on Monday at 11 as well. And obviously, huge thanks to Simon and Corentin for all their very hard work over the last few months to turn a very complex system, the EU ETS and its future, into a tool that we hope can be of very high use in the near future. Thank you all, and see you soon.